From Bowling Green State University and the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, this is BG Ideas.
I'm going to show you this with a wonderful experiment.
You're listening to the Big Ideas podcast, a collaboration between the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society and the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. I'm Jolie Sheffer, professor of English and American Culture Studies and the director of ICS. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BGSU or its employees. Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations, present and past, who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the indigenous individuals and communities who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. This season of Big Ideas focuses on sustainability and sustainable practices. True sustainability is dependent on equally balanced responses to social, economic, and environmental needs. Today's episode considers sustainable models for providing equitable access to menstruation products. I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Jordan Wilfong and Courtney Foerg. Jordan is an assistant professor of social work here at BGSU with a focus on the intersections of poverty, discrimination, and the criminal justice system. He has taught courses on social welfare policy and other topics. Courtney is a fourth-year social work major in the Honors College at BGSU. Courtney works as an after-hours advocate at The Cocoon, an agency for sexual and domestic violence survivors, and she's a member of BGSU's Student Organization of Social Workers. She's previously appeared in an article for BG Independent Media and has written for BG Authors about the problem of period poverty. In the fall of 2021, Courtney, with the help of her faculty mentor, Jordan, worked on the research project Period Poverty in the United States, Achieving Menstrual Equity in Bowling Green, Ohio. This project was funded by the Center for Undergraduate Research and Scholarship. Henceforth, we'll refer to as CURS. CURS provides funding for undergraduate students to pursue research, scholarly, or creative projects with a faculty mentor in their chosen discipline. For more information, visit bgsu.edu/CURS. Thanks so much for joining me today, Jordan and Courtney.
Our pleasure.
Courtney, would you start by introducing us to your project and talking a little bit about what got you interested in this issue?
Yeah, so this all started for me when I was in high school. I saw a YouTube video about an unhoused woman who was on her period, and she goes to a bathroom and rolls up a piece of paper and uses it as a tampon. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've never realized this was an issue. And that really stuck with me all throughout high school and coming to BG and becoming a social work student. I learned a lot about advocacy, and so I thought that'd be a great way to combine my honors project with what I was learning at school. So I decided to have a menstrual products drive. So first I did some research kind of looking into what period poverty is, if it's an issue in the United States, and then how I could create resources in Bowling Green. So I ended up doing a menstrual products drive combined with a social media campaign so that I could kind of spread the word, let people know what period poverty is, just kind of getting people more aware of the issue.
So can you please step back a little bit and define for us, what does period poverty mean to you in terms of your research?
Yeah, so period poverty is the systemic lack of access to menstrual products as well as menstrual hygiene education, which I think is a really important piece of that. So period poverty is people who don't have access to be able to afford those products as well as don't have the information surrounding menstruation.
Jordan, as a professor of social work, your research examines the influence of institutions on poverty, discrimination, and criminal justice. Was period poverty a topic you'd studied previously? And how did your expertise help inform Courtney's project?
Sure. Well, as a social work professor, sometimes I catch myself wanting to have like social justice cred and know all of the major social problems in our society. But I have to admit that my knowledge of period poverty was rather minimal prior to our work together. I will say that I've done some research related to feminist criminology and issues affecting women in the criminal justice system, most specifically related to access to hygiene products while incarcerated. So I did have some cursory knowledge of the topic related to that. However, as I mentioned, I didn't have any idea the extent to which this problem is occurring within our country. So I really learned a lot through my collaboration with Courtney during this project related to this issue. And as far as my expertise, nowadays I wonder with 2 kids in diapers whether my expertise is like feces or something like that. But in reality, I think Courtney and I have a deep commitment to social justice, and the foundation of how we view the world is related to equality. And of course, that means intersectionality and issues related to discrimination. So I think, if anything, I was able to help guide Courtney along with this project. It was related to keeping us on track with that. But of course, she was there as well. So it was really, as I told Courtney a few times, this being her supervisor on this project was probably the easiest job I've ever had because of just how diligent she's been as a student.
In 2020, the official poverty rate, according to the U.S. Census, was 11.4% of the population, and 45% of those living in poverty also menstruate. How is menstruation negatively affected by poverty?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to look at period poverty as a social justice issue, and it's bigger than just menstruation. We know that Black menstruators are affected at greater rates than white menstruators, and so we can't just look at it as just this area surrounding menstruation. It needs to be intersectional, as Dr. Wilfong said.
And what are some of the ways in which lack of access kind of exacerbates the challenges for people in poverty?
Yeah, an example I like to use is for a lot of families, it's the decision between lunch that day or a menstrual product. So when you're sending your children to school, either without lunch or without menstrual products, both are detrimental to being able to focus in school. You're either hungry or you're worried about bleeding through your clothes. And that contributes to that cycle of poverty because it's hindering their education, their ability to focus in school and to do well in school. So it's a much bigger issue.
How does that play out? You talked about your research into the criminal justice system and within jails and prisons. How does that also play out in that environment?
That's a good question. And one of the things we know from the great research in feminist criminology is the relationship between incarceration for women and poverty and discrimination. The overwhelming majority of women who are incarcerated have been born into poverty, experienced a lot of discrimination and oftentimes abuse and trauma and addiction and things like that. So when you think about the extent to which the lives of many women in the justice system have been tragic, and if you throw on top of that challenges accessing hygiene products while incarcerated, it just kind of stops you cold to think about the challenges and how we also have the highest rate of women incarcerated in our country of the entire world. Oftentimes that gets overlooked among the topic of mass incarceration since it's typically focused on men. So it's a big issue. And I will say that there has been some movement across the country with regards to providing more access in jails and prisons for hygiene products, but as is often the case, it varies from region to region. So it's an important issue to keep in mind for sure.
Courtney, through your research, what are some of the barriers to access right now?
I think the biggest one is being able to afford menstrual products in poverty, but something I think that's not talked about is the stigma surrounding menstruation. It's such a taboo topic. I mean, even like periods is a euphemism for menstruation. And so I think that the fact that our sex education doesn't address menstruation from a way of acceptance, really. I think it's kind of a secret. A lot of schools will separate boys and girls, and boys learn nothing about menstruation, and girls are taught it's something secret. You can have your little pouch that you have in your pocket and no one knows about it. And I think that stigma has contributed to a lack of policy and a lack of awareness surrounding menstruation.
One of the things in our research and talking with you brought up is the way in which menstrual products are treated in terms of like whether they're taxed or not. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's strange in my opinion. I don't know why they're taxed as a luxury product when they're a necessity. Without menstrual products, our rate of infection significantly increases, and taxing them as a luxury product just makes them more expensive when people already can't afford them. So it's definitely something a lot of people working to end period poverty are addressing, is trying to get that luxury tax removed.
We also know that there are other countries that are making significant moves towards this. I know that Scotland has guaranteed access to menstrual products. Who are some of the leaders towards changing this around the globe?
Yeah, I know in New York City, Congresswoman Grace Meng is working to provide menstrual products to specifically New York City, but she's definitely a warrior for period poverty in general. With COVID and the recent stimulus bills and everything, she was trying to get money towards menstruation. There's very little policy currently in the US. Right now, 2 states allow for food stamps to be used for menstruation. And mind you, it's not extra money. It's just like now you can pay less for food and you can use it for menstruation. And that's just 2 states. And that's about all the policy we have.
Where do you see leadership happening on this issue, Jordan?
That's a good question. And it just makes me think about the conditions confronting a lot of the powers that be within our governmental and economic systems. And as a result, the lack of voices from a policy perspective. Of course, there are always, great examples. And that's one of the wonderful things about the current age in which we are living. There is more activism, and there are more, quite frankly, women and women of color in our government who are speaking up about a lot of the issues that had been ignored and overlooked. So this example of the representative in New York City is wonderful, and that's just a voice that needs to be amplified, in my opinion. And it's great that young emerging social workers like Courtney and other like-minded people are talking about this issue. And it's also great that countries like Scotland have made this a human right, and what that means as a model for how it can be changed across the globe as well.
Yeah, it really is the younger generation, though, that we are seeing kind of lead this charge in a lot of ways. And it's often happening at the local level, right? With students in individual schools fighting to get those products available in bathrooms. Is that a piece of this that interested you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my project is not unique. There are so many other girls who are doing these projects in their schools. And yeah, I think that's definitely accurate to say that it's really this movement's being spearheaded by people my age and people younger than me. I've noticed a huge shift with people my age on social media talking about menstruation. I don't think that was something that was normal. And now, if you go on TikTok, you'll see a lot of conversations about that. And I think that's really important towards creating more awareness and eventually getting that policy.
We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for listening to the Big Ideas podcast.
Question. Answer. Discussion.
If you are passionate about big ideas, consider sponsoring this program. To have your name or organization mentioned here, please contact us at ics@bgsu.edu.
Welcome back to the Big Ideas podcast. Today I'm speaking with Jordan Wilfong and Courtney Foerg about their research project, Period Poverty in the United States, Achieving Menstrual Equity in Bowling Green, Ohio. This question's for both of you. What were your goals in approaching this project, and how did you navigate the mentorship process? Jordan, you mentioned this was an easy project to mentor, but still, in thinking about kind of what your roles were and how you wanted to collaborate on this, what were each of your perspectives on that?
Yeah, my main goal was starting a conversation. I wanted, the drive's great. It provides some products for a short amount of time, but I wanted to educate campus on what period poverty is to create a little bit longer lasting change. And so something that I was really surprised by with doing my project at BGSU was how easy it was to collaborate with Dr. Wilfong and with my other mentors. They always had so many ideas for me on how to spread the word. With Dr. Wilfong recommended BG Independent News and working with other organizations on campus. That was really cool to see how once you tell people, people are really willing to help and, get started. So that was really awesome.
And what about for you, Jordan?
I think, while it's important to work with people who you may have some differences with or whatever, for Courtney and I, it's been such a natural fit working together. And I think that's because we share a lot of common values related to social justice. And just there was a very easygoing collaboration from the very beginning. Our meetings were always positive and I thought productive, and Courtney was always prepared with good questions and would follow up on some of the suggestions I had. And it was just a continual process because we knew it was an important issue and we were happy to spread the word. And I think it was really as someone who's worked with a lot of different people over the course of my life from a research collaboration perspective, that mutual respect is so important. And I think it's also important in a mentee-mentor relationship. And I always felt respected by Courtney and tried to do the same towards her. And we just held ourselves accountable to the work that we had planned to do. And it was just a real wonderful experience.
You mentioned that, the drive is a key piece of this project. And, for that, you collaborated with a couple of different organizations, the feminist organization Rallying for Gender Equity, Forge, and the On-Campus Food Bank. What did that collaboration look like, and what were some of those relationships?
Yeah, so when I first started this project, I was working with Dr. Casey Snyder, another one of my mentors, and she told me about this organization. She was like, Courtney, do you know there's already an organization doing this? And I had no idea. So I was able to join them, and it was so great while I'm spending all day doing all this research to have a place to go with other people who were passionate and to get to talk about period poverty. And while we didn't end up doing our drive together, they were so supportive of advertising my drive and sharing my social media and anything that I needed. They were always there. So I really appreciated that. And then collaborating with the food bank, that's where all of the products went. So I was really appreciative of Dr. Orr and all of their help as well.
How did your research for the project kind of relate to the drive? How did those fit together as pieces of the project?
Yeah, so the way I did my research was to find ways for me to create content for social media. And so I really wanted to find ways to kind of pull people in and easily educate people and make it easy for people to find the information. So I spent about, I think, a semester doing just the research. And then this past semester in the fall was when I was posting the content. So I really wanted to, since I had so much time, I was spending 2 years on this, finding the best ways to reach people. So that was also a piece of my research. Doing an online campaign and doing an online donation page was something that really increased my donations. And like skills that I learned in the social work program in terms of advocacy really helped as well.
I have a follow-up question that is related to the use of social media. So you were mentioning that you use social media as a way to educate. What decisions went into which social media platforms you chose to use and kind of what you wanted social media to add to this?
Yeah, so when I started, I made a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account. And quickly, I did use the Facebook, but quickly realized Instagram was the easiest way for me to have the information easily accessible. And I really just wanted to use it to start a conversation. So for example, not every week that I posted was about period poverty specifically. Like one week I just said, share a word that describes how you felt when you got your first period. I just wanted my social media to be a place where people could come and feel comfortable to talk about menstruation and kind of break down those walls. So I found that Instagram really lended itself well to letting people share the content and talk about it online.
And do you think that's because of the platform itself or the users or some combination?
I would say some combination. I'm really fortunate to have a lot of relationships on campus who were more than willing to share on their organization's social media. So I think every week I'd go to Dr. Wilfong and be like, I want to send it to this newsletter and this Instagram and have them post it. And so Instagram lended itself well to having people share the page and get more followers. And then I think the people who followed were really willing to engage.
And what's your experience with thinking of social media as a tool for equity and social justice work?
And I guess I was a little bit late to the party with respect to social media's role because I've seen some of the negative consequences that it's had on society with respect to misinformation and the role of algorithms in indoctrinating people with incorrect information. But I've sort of been reawakened over the last couple of years. I know my wife, who's also a social work professor, got on TikTok and was realizing there's these algorithms where there's a whole bunch of therapists and just supportive people who are sharing like factual information about ways to make the world a better place and to destigmatize issues. So every time that happens, I'm just so happy that it's there and that it is being utilized for good. And it's all about getting information out. And there are ways to do that now, as long as it's the correct information. And of course, Courtney was doing that. And there's a far reach towards that now, and it can be harnessed for good. And I think that's a great thing.
It's a good reminder, right, that not all of social media has to be this kind of cesspool of negativity, right? It can be a source of educational and destigmatizing information. I have a question related to that theme of sustainability. So we know that part of that is how do you make this project sustainable in the sense of beyond the drive, how do you continue the work? So that's one piece of this. But I'm also curious what role you think about environmental sustainability in what kinds of products people are given access to and encouraged to learn more about.
Yeah, I think that's something my drive didn't address. And if I could do it again, I would. There are a lot of really great options. There's menstrual cups, which would allow people to not need new products for up to 5 to 10 years. There's also reusable pads. And in my research, there was an organization working to bring third world countries like machines to make their own menstrual pads. And then the town was completely self-sufficient. They were able to just make their pads and give them whenever someone needed them. And then those people had those pads for years. And I think, again, going back to social media, that's a great piece of people talking about it more online. I've seen reusable underwear and things like that, that now that we're talking about it, I know people are going to keep creating solutions. And I think it's totally feasible for us to have reusable menstrual products and to stop using the disposable.
Typically, when we talk about menstruation, we do so in a very gendered way that rarely acknowledges the fact that there are individuals who are not cisgender females who menstruate. So, what have you learned about that in the course of your research, and how does that inform what you think about best practices going forward to ending period poverty?
Yes, I'm really glad that you asked that question because in my research, menstruation and period poverty was completely gendered and labeled as a female issue, which isn't true because not everyone who menstruates is a woman and not all women menstruate. So I think that changing our language around the issue, I try to use the word menstruating individuals or menstruator, is really important because while I'm all for women's empowerment and that tends to be the message right now surrounding menstruation, we're excluding a significant portion of menstruators. And so it's really important to be mindful of our language.
Do you want to add anything, Jordan?
I just think that was just a very essential point related to the topic, and I'm glad that you mentioned it during your research as well. And I guess that's just an example of the fight for, gender equality and gender identity, which is really at the heart of an important social justice movement right now that is obviously essential.
Absolutely. The scope of this project was primarily local, right? The university in the Bowling Green area. How do you see this playing out nationally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that what I did at BG can be and has been done in a lot of other areas. And I think that as we keep having those conversations, I think the key is really policy. And so it's really important that wherever you are, you're having those conversations with other people. And that was a great thing about social media is I was able to have followers not just from Bowling Green. My followers spanned 3 different countries. And so, that's more people talking about it and more chance of policy getting created because I think the awareness is really essential.
And on that subject of policy, what further work can be done? What would you like to see be done, perhaps even locally on our own campus, to make hygiene products more broadly accessible?
Yeah, I think food stamps is a good place to start. We don't have that in Ohio. We don't have any menstruation legislation in Ohio. But I think on campus, I know Forge is working to get menstrual products in all of the campus bathrooms. And I definitely think that's something that would be feasible for BGSU to work on providing for their students. And I haven't come up with a great idea for a policy to necessarily bring menstrual products to everyone, but I think that it's possible.
And Jordan, given your work, in social work and thinking about you're educating a generation of future social workers, what are some of the kind of more policy-oriented or systemic changes that you would like to see happen locally or even, nationally?
That's a good question. And I've been thinking about it a lot over the course of this project. And just starting on campus, you think the importance of having access for every student, I think is something that is essential because when you just realize this is a health issue, this is a significant issue. So I think that's a conversation that I would like to continue after Courtney graduates. And we've had a little discussion about continuing this project in terms of the collection after Courtney graduates. And that's something that we're going to revisit as a faculty. And I would be happy to take the lead on that as well. And when I think about large-scale policy solutions, I can't help, one of the things about being a social worker is that we don't even have to hide our bias with respect to social justice and the changes that we want to see. And we're talking about a need for a radical redistribution of our political and economic systems because we know that women are more likely to be impoverished in a country that already has among the highest rates of poverty of any industrialized country in the world. So when we think about what it means when you don't have enough money to afford hygiene products, it means that you're living in a system where there isn't guaranteed income for everyone. There aren't living wages in the workforce. There's a gender pay gap as well, gender identity pay gap. So we're talking about big changes that need to happen on a broad scale within our democratic system. And it's going to be a long road to hoe. But whenever we look at reality, which is one of the wonderful things about Courtney's project and just her as a student, is she focuses on what's really happening. We're not looking the other way and pretending that it's not happening. So we need to first acknowledge reality, and then we need a radical redistribution of who's in charge of our democracy and what people are being centered. And the people who need to be centered are those who are experiencing these types of issues, because it's a human rights abuse. And there are models to look to in terms of policy changes related to gender equality and workers' rights and things like that. So it's going to, as I said, it's a long road to hoe, but it's one that we're going to have to keep going towards.
As we conclude today's conversation, I'd like to ask both of you to consider what you would recommend for listeners. Courtney, maybe especially for students who might be listening, how would you encourage them to address the questions and the issues that matter to them? And then Jordan, I'll ask you the same question from your perspective as a faculty member and a member of the community.
I would say start small and just have those conversations. If you're a menstruator, talk about it. Don't be afraid. Don't pretend it's not happening. And if you aren't a menstruator, I guarantee you know someone. Ask them a question about it. Those conversations can be huge. I know my grandfather, before this project, I'd never talked about menstruation with him. And through this, I started. And now he is a huge period poverty advocate and tells all his friends about it. So those conversations can really build and create a huge awareness. So just start having those conversations.
And what would you recommend, Jordan?
First of all, I completely agree with what Courtney said about starting locally and starting in our own lives and being a model for what it means to push forward justice and equality for all people. Because, I remain an optimist, and I think that people are good at their core as long as you help people acknowledge reality. We can't look the other way, and then find solutions to help people in your community and to serve others, to ensure that there's an adequate standard of living for all people, particularly related to, serious health issues.
One of the things I like about this project, Courtney, is what you're really demonstrating is anyone out there, right, is likely to have organizations, communities that they're a part of, whether that's a school, a church, or, synagogue, an organization like the Girl Scouts, right, where you meet someplace where you are engaging with people. And in any of those circumstances, a small but very important first step could be to make period poverty a key element of that, ensuring access in those spaces, opening lines of communication for that. So I hope our listeners really are inspired by you and your project and the ability to really sort of target in on an issue that matters and act locally to begin to make those changes. But to acknowledge, too, that those local dimensions also have, impacts at the larger scale. But you can always start local to move towards that larger solution.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. If you work somewhere, go to your boss, ask them to provide menstrual products. If you're at a school, ask your principal if there's a way to provide menstrual products. Those small changes can really create a huge effect.
Anything either of you would like to add?
No, I think this was great. I'm really happy to have spent this time talking about the project.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for joining us, Jordan and Courtney. Listeners, you can keep up with ICS happenings by following us on Twitter and Instagram at ICS BGSU or following our Facebook page. You can listen to Big Ideas wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please subscribe and rate us on your preferred platform. For more information or to suggest a topic or guest for Big Ideas, visit bgsu.edu/BG Ideas. Our producers are Chris Cavera and Marco Mendoza, with sound engineering by Marcus Long, Deanna McKeegan, and Marco Mendoza. Research assistance was provided by Lauren Degener, with editing by Joanna Simpson and Carrie Hanlon. This conversation was recorded in the Stanton Audio Recording Studio in the Michael and Sarah Colleen Center at Bowling Green State University.